Welcome back. A few weeks ago I asked you which of these 4 watches you'd like to see reviewed first, and the winner by far is the Corgeut Railmaster homage, with the Parnas coming in second with about half as many votes, followed up by the Carnival and the Reef Tiger. So today we're going to look at the Railmaster, which also means that this is the watch I'll be giving away at the end of this video. And if you're disappointed that the Parnas didn't win, well, make sure you stay to the end because I'll talk about that for a second. If you don't remember from the previous video, I showed you these 4 watches as they all have Miyota movements, and Miyota has quietly upgraded some of their movements to have hacking. Now, this Corgeut has a Miyota 821A, which is usually a more decorated version of the 8215, and that is one of the models that has been upgraded. But this one has one of the older ones, so it doesn't have hacking, but some of the newer ones might. Now, this of course takes its inspiration from the Omega Railmaster, with its very cool vertical brush dial, and filming this thing can be a bit of a challenge. With the camera parallel to the watch and too much light, all you really see are those vertical lines, rather than the more subtle effect you see in person. And I've currently seen 3 different versions of this dial, but by far this one is my favorite, with its yellow gold indices that kind of give it an old Lume color look. But that's enough talking. Let's jump right in and take a closer look. So first off, there's some confusion on this watch when it comes to size. Some sellers say it's 39 and others say 41, and it's sort of both. The real width is 40.5 millimeters, and that's when you measure from the 9 to the 3 without the crown. Yet if you measure from the 12 to the 6, it's actually 39, so that's where they're getting that from. With the crown, however, it's only about 44.5. So if you're hoping for a smaller under 40mm watch, sorry to disappoint you. Although lug to lug here is a nice 47.5mm, so it should wear decently, even on some slender wrists. It's also got a good thickness at 11.3mm, which is about as good as you can get without going up to a more expensive movement. So again, it should wear decently in most situations. Lug width here is 20mm, so plenty of strap options to play with, and while you won't need them, you may want them. Weight-wise, it's 83 grams, and most of that is in the watch itself, as the strap feels rather light, so the watch itself has a really nice solid feel to it. Yet it does only have 50 meters of water resistance, which is honestly kinda what you expect from most AliExpress watches. The price for these seems to range from about $90 to $100, and that's on both AliExpress and eBay. Although I got mine off eBay, and I actually made the seller a lower offer that they accepted, so you could always try that. But then again, mine also didn't really come with any packaging, just a lot of bubble wrap and thrown into a hard styrofoam box. The case is listed as stainless, and while it's rather minimal and kinda generic, especially when you look at the blank case back, the finishing is surprisingly well done. Everything has a brushed finish and is very smooth to the touch, even on the bottom of the lugs, which is actually rather impressive at the price. The only thing that doesn't feel smooth is the transition line where the clean bezel meets the case, and inside the lugs. The key defining characteristic of this case is the top of the lugs, where they're cut in and angled down towards the straps, giving it a very distinct look, which honestly is also a borrowed look. The crown is at the 3, and it's a good size and texture, but nothing too remarkable, other than it's actually a screw-down crown, which is a little odd on a watch with 50 meters of water resistance, but hey, I'll take it where I can get it. One thing about the movement in the crown, as I said, it is a Miyota 821A, which normally has a date wheel, and here you can see there is no date. So either they removed the date wheel or they just covered it up, as you do have a second position on the crown when you pull it out, just as if it was still there. And you can also feel the date switch over when you're changing the time. Although here it's not actually at midnight, you can actually feel it click more around 7:25. So it's kind of a minor annoyance that they didn't align it properly, but since you never really see it, it kinda doesn't really matter. And I'm sure they got a better deal buying Miyota 821As in bulk rather than the non-date version. The movement also has hand winding and around 40-hour power reserve. And if you're lucky, you could actually get a newer 821A with hacking, but this one doesn't have it. Accuracy-wise, however, is pretty good. this one only gaining about 3 seconds a day while it sat on my winder for a few weeks. Now, the crystal covering the movement is mineral, but the one on the front is definitely sapphire, and I tested that with a diamond tester. It's a nice, clear, flat crystal, but I don't believe there is any AR coating. And underneath that, of course, is the dial, which is just stunningly cool, which is a black color, but with vertical brushings down the entire thing, which winds up making the entire thing look more gunmetal gray at certain angles, giving it a striking but very cool effect, although not the most camera-friendly effect. Now, just looking at pictures of the Omega, I can tell that its brushing is a little bit better. The vertical lines just look a little more uniform. But this is pretty close. In fact, the entire thing is remarkably similar. The main thing that draws your eyes to the dial is a simple white train track chapter ring, which is occasionally interrupted by sharp gold triangles as hour indicators. They're not applied, but they are a rather thick application of paint. And I just love the color combination here of the gold against that dial, with that color help giving it an almost aged Lume look, as well as adding to the vintage feel with that chapter ring. White painted numerals are used at the 12, 3, 6, and 9, followed with a crosshair at the center helping to divide and orientate your eyes on the dial. Sword hands are used by the hour and minute, followed up by a very long stick with a lollipop for seconds. The overall length is good here, but that long second hand occasionally suffers from a little bit of a stutter, which Miyota movements can be prone to. Really, there's not much else to say about the dial. It's a great effect, and one I instantly fell for. Now, my first question when I saw this watch online was how good that brushing effect is in person, and my second, of course, is how good is the Lume. And do remember here that Chinese specials are not really known for their Lume. Initially, it does look good, and I really love the pointed indices here. But you don't really know how good a watch is unless you really compare it to something else. So I threw it up against my Vostok Amphibia, which as dive watches go is kinda subpar, but as regular watches go, it's actually okay. And on the other side, you have my extremely accurate Cadison Imperial, which compared to most Chinese watches is actually pretty good. But compared to regular watches, it's kinda meh. Now, it doesn't take long before you start to see the Corgeut fade in real time. But the real test is really a 40-minute time lapse. And with that, it only takes about 15 minutes before the indices on the dial fade, so those are really not great. Yet after 40 minutes, the hands are still there. They are hanging on by a thread, but it's better than the hands on the other two Chinese watches, although not quite as good as the Vostok. So as regular watches go, the Lume is not really good, but as AliExpress watches go, it's actually better than most. Surprisingly, however, is the Lume on the Parnas's dial, and it's still nicely visible, although that's not incredibly useful since the hands have already vanished. Lastly, let's talk strap, and this one is a little odd. It's black and leather, and while it has a good leather texture on the back, the top is this suede, almost microfiber thing. It's not horrible, it's just a little odd. And it also has this nice push-button clasp that's a little different. The clasp itself is actually really good, and it's easy to feed it in and change the holes. Yet the odd thing is that the excess goes on the inside of the band, and it doesn't always go where it's supposed to. It feels decent, and it should last a bit, but the thing that really bothers me here is that it's rather thin and flimsy, which actually bugs me more than the suede texture on top. So you can use it, but my recommendation would be just to swap it out. Plus, this dial and that case are really screaming for something better. Now regardless, it wears okay with it, and is actually really comfortable. The lugs don't really slope down much on that case, so the watch itself looks a little flatter compared to some others. But the low height and the under 48mm lug-to-lug really help it sit comfortably on your wrist. I'd say it wears closer to a 41 than a 39 or a 40, but visually it actually looks bigger than that. Especially since I've been wearing divers a lot lately. And here, that minimal case and bezel just mean more room for a larger dial in that case, which just tends to give it a larger presence than it actually has. So, what do I think about the Corgeut? Well, I like it. The strap sucks and the Lume could be better, but it's kind of what you expect with one of these watches. But otherwise, at a price of around $90, it's a pretty good looking, solid watch. So I think it's worth it, especially if you've always wanted a Railmaster. And that's kind of the whole point with these homage watches. Some people love them, some people hate them, and that's a whole discussion and a debate for another time. For me, I'm okay with them, especially in this instance, as I don't really see them as replacements as much as introductions, as it's an affordable way to really try something out, as it introduces people to designs they may not be familiar with or really even thought about in the past, especially when it happens to be something other than a Submariner. And this is what happened to me with the Cadison Conquest homage. As before that watch, I never really thought about a Longines Conquest, and now it's something I'd actually like to get one day. And the same thing has happened here. I just love that vertical brushed look on the dial. And before this, the Railmaster was never even on my radar. And I always thought that if I was to get an Omega, it would wind up being a Speedmaster or maybe a Planet Ocean, kind of like everyone else. But now if I ever get an Omega, it's definitely going to be a Railmaster, which might wind up being sooner than later, as I'm not going to have this one around to tide me over, as it's going to the winner of the giveaway, which is Andy B. So congratulations, and I should be in touch with you shortly. Now, as for the harness, it did come in second place, but it did have a fairly big response with I think just over 100 votes. So I'm going to get to it as soon as I can. Might be the end of this month, it might be the very beginning of next month. And since I should be just over 8,000 subscribers at that point, I'll be giving it away as well at the end of its review. So, if you entered in the previous contest to win this Corgeut, you'll be automatically entered to win the harness. And if you happen to miss out on that video, just put a hashtag relative time in a comment down below and I'll count you in on this. Now, as usual, let me know in the comments what you think about the Corgeut. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for joining me.